1990s is the greatest decade American cinema has ever seen. In 1994 alone, you had Pulp Fiction, Natural Born Killers, The Shawshank Redemption, Clerks, Speed, and True Lies. Even the bad movies are good. The 90s gave us Striptease and Showgirls. And those are only the white movies. Our neighbors over at BAM are in the midst of an epic film series called Black 90s, a turning point in American cinema. Of course, it arrives with a sad coincidence, the untimely death of John Singleton, director of Boys in the Hood. This classic is one of dozens of films in the 18-day series, and today we're joined by its curator, Ashley Clark. Welcome to 112BK.
Hi, thanks for having me.
So maybe let's start by talking a little bit about John Singleton, who was the first African-American and still the youngest person to be nominated for an Oscar for Best Director.
Yeah,
He's 24
so
at the time.
He was just 24 when he made Boys in the Hood, which is a kind of classic, poetic, very moving tale of inner city LA life, starring Ice Cube and Cuba Gooding Jr., and it's a wonderful piece of filmmaking. I think it's one of those films that is so referenced in the culture that it's maybe ossified into, it was almost parodied in a way, and it became something that wasn't respected as much as it should have been, but it's a beautiful piece of work.
And it was actually parodied too with...
Don't Be a Menace to South Central with...
drinking juice in the hood, exactly.
And things like that,
yeah.
you know. So I think over time people maybe forgot quite how good it was, but it was remarkable that he was just 23 years old when he made it. He went on to forge an extraordinary career, making films like Poetic Justice with Janet Jackson and Tupac, which were screening in the series, Higher Learning, films like Rosewood, which are less well known. And he died at just 51, and we were hoping to welcome him to BAM on Sunday for the Q&A for Boys in the Hood. So you can imagine it's all hit us extremely hard. And our thoughts just go out to his family and his friends. And one thing that really struck us all was how much of a mentor he was to a whole other generation of filmmakers that he helped to come through. So he's going to be greatly missed. He was a really great presence.
Absolutely. And as you mentioned, he did really sort of create a genre. And many other films that explore sort of similar coming-of-age stories are in this series.
Yeah, I mean, that became one of the key, I suppose, micro-genres of the early 90s in black cinema. So you have films like New Jack City and Straight Outta Brooklyn, Menace to Society. And these are all films that we're screening. They really captured a moment. There was a New York Times Magazine article in 1991 entitled They've Gotta Have Us, which was a very conspicuously male lineup of filmmakers who were all working in that same kind of genre. And that's kind of one of the most iconic, I think, cinematic representations of that era, to the point where Spike Lee in 1996 is kind of critiquing that with his own film Clockers, which we're showing. And obviously Spike Lee is another key figure of this era, and I would say Brooklyn's greatest living filmmaker.
And this is such a robust and thoughtful lineup. You can see that, as you mentioned, you have films in the series that are commenting on other films in the series that maybe came a little bit earlier. Why did you decide to put together this series on 90s black cinema, and why is it a turning point for American filmmaking?
Well, I think ultimately when I'm looking at curating a series, I have to think of certain frameworks. So the first film I thought of in this whole series was Crooklyn by Spike Lee, because it's 25th anniversary coming up. And I thought, well, we could do a one-off screening of this one film, but wouldn't it be nice to look at this whole breadth of time and look at what other films were being made at this time, look at what other filmmakers were active in different genres, and to kind of make the point that black film in and of itself is not a genre. And I think that's a cliche. We hear about box office reports of black films not selling or whatever. It was really important for me to see that within that there were filmmakers operating in queer spaces, in comedy, in thriller, and there were filmmakers who'd got their starts in the 70s in the LA Rebellion independent filmmaking movement, filmmakers like Charles Burnett and Julie Dash and Haile Gerima, whose films we've screened already. And they were coming back in the 90s and making work and influencing new generations. And it's interesting for me as a curator to bring these things under one banner and give younger audiences an opportunity to discover things, and also to look at audiences who were there at the time and give them a chance to revisit and draw their own connections. I think the whole theatrical experience is really important. That's our bread and butter as a repertory cinema. You know, we have competition from Netflix and Criterion, and they do great work, but it's really important for us to entice people into the cinema, into that communal space, to experience these films, and we can commune together and discuss them afterwards. That's really important to me.
And you are curating these conversations in addition to the films that are being shown on the big screen. So you had Charles Burnett in conversation, you mentioned during opening weekend. What was that like for you?
It was wonderful. I mean, Charles and I have had a few conversations for certain podcasts and Q&As, but he came in the other evening for the opening night film, which was To Sleep with Anger.
And for people who don't know that film, maybe a couple sentences.
Yeah, it's his third feature film from 1990. It stars and was executive produced by Danny Glover, who was then fresh off of Lethal Weapon 2, so he had some real clout to help get this small family drama made. It's about a family in South Central LA, a family with a history from the South. They're from Mississippi, so they're part of the Great Migration. And one day they're visited by this mysterious stranger, played by Danny Glover, who may or may not be the devil. And it's a kind of...
That old thing.
That old thing.
Yeah.
And it's a film about family and about folklore and about Southern traditions and history. And it's funny, and it's a film about the blues and about music. And it's just a wonderful piece of work that has had a kind of a resurgence critically and commercially in recent times. It's just been released by the Criterion Collection. But for many, many years, it was difficult to see. So again, as in my work as a repertory programmer, I think it's important for me to be bringing things to audiences that they may not have seen before. Even if these things have come back into the cultural conversation to an extent, we can never give up.
At this point in the conversation, I would like to introduce a rating system that we will be using for the rest of this interview, which is you can give films 1 to 5 Angela Bassetts. How many Angela Bassetts are you going to give to Sleep with Anger?
How many was it? 1 to 5?
1 to 5.
I would give 5 Angela Bassetts.
5 out of 5 Angela Bassetts.
Absolutely.
Okay, that is a...
Can I give 6? Can I give it 6?
Let's give it 6.
6
Why
out of
not?
5.
It's a made-up system.
Indeed.
6 Angela Bassetts to Sleep with Anger. So the films in the series are firmly planted in the 90s, from 1990 up to 1999. Is that right?
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. So the entire decade. I'm curious about how you see the evolution of black cinema, while acknowledging that, as you said, black cinema is not a genre. How are some of these films impacting the African American directors who are working today?
Well, I think some of the key directors today, key African-American directors like Dee Rees, Barry Jenkins, Jordan Peele, are looking back to this era in terms of some aesthetics and themes and narratives, and you can see some fairly clear connections. What's interesting is that after the 90s, things quietened down a little bit. And I think what we see now are maybe lessons being learned from the 90s and how certain careers weren't followed up on. What's really exciting is that filmmakers like Ava DuVernay and Dee Rees and Barry Jenkins, they're starting to make films in quick succession. They're starting to make 2, 3, 4 movies back to back. And I think that is due to a wider awakening in financial terms, in terms of studios, that black people do go to movies. But sometimes people forget this. And things are kind of circular, but I think that we're in a stage now where we can be positive about the future.
We'd like to do just a little bit of a quiz, and there's no right answers to these questions except for the ones where there is. So why don't we start with this question? In your opinion, which Nia Long is the best Nia Long? Love Jones Nia Long, Friday Nia Long, or Boys in the Hood Nia Long?
Love Jones.
Which 90s rapper turned actor is the best rapper? And which is the best actor? You can choose from the following list: Tupac, Ice Cube, Nas, DMX, Kid, Play, and Will Smith, who's not represented in this series but is ubiquitous.
I'm going to say DMX because I want people to come out and see Belly.
Okay.
Directed by
Best
Hype
rapper
Williams.
or best actor or both?
Both everything.
Okay. Tell us a little bit about Belly and how many Angela Bassetts are you giving it?
I'm going to give it 7 out of 5 Angela Bassetts.
Excellent. You love Belly.
Yeah, absolutely.
Why should people come see it?
It's a one-off. It's the only film directed by Hype Williams, who was arguably the most important and influential music video director of the era. He directed music videos, films in their own right for Busta Rhymes, Missy Elliott, and so on. And this film is unlike anything else. It's ostensibly a crime drama, but the plot is incomprehensible at best. It's a purely visual experience. And lest I sound too lofty or pretentious, it's really great to immerse yourself in that kind of thing on the big screen because it's pure cinema. It's trusting the images and sound to do the work, and it's really immersive.
Okay,
Yeah.
Belly, 7 out of 5 Angela Bassetts for an incomprehensible yet unmissable film.
That's how we roll.
Wonderful. Okay. How old was Matty Rich when he released Straight Outta Brooklyn? Was he A, 19, B, 23, C, 28?
A, 19.
That is correct. Tell me a little bit about Straight Outta Brooklyn.
It's kind of part of that same stable of films thematically, the young kind of inner city, urban blight, but young characters trying to make their way in a world of drugs and crime. But it's made with real energy and real heart. And Matty Rich went on to make another film called The Inkwell before moving in, I think, potentially into advertising. I'm not sure that he made a full kind of transition into a career as a filmmaker. I wish he had. But yeah, Straight Outta Brooklyn's a really brilliant debut.
Which of the films in this program has the best soundtrack?
Waiting to Exhale has a great soundtrack.
It does.
I wanted to mention Whitney.
Yeah.
Here. And I think one quick thing about this series in general, you're seeing a lot of rappers and music artists transitioning into being screen icons. So Tupac, Ice Cube, Janet Jackson. That's one theme that runs through this series. But yeah, let's say Waiting to Exhale.
Another theme is Samuel L. Jackson.
Yeah.
Which of the following films, and not all of these are in your lineup, but which of them doesn't have Samuel L. Jackson? A, The Return of Superfly. B, Jungle Fever. C, Menace to Society. D, Friday. E, Eve's Bayou.
Is it A?
Trick question, they all have Samuel L. Jackson.
What was the first question? What was
The Return of Superfly.
I can't say I knew that was a film. So I've been stumped.
Stumped the curator. Excellent.
I resign. I hereby tender my resignation.
Okay, if you absolutely had to choose one of the following films to include as an add-on to this series, which would it be? A, Bad Boys. B, Foxy Brown. C, Menace to Society. D, Sister Act 2, Back in the Habit.
Let's say D.
Okay.
Sister Act 2, Back in the Habit.
Great.
Because there's not enough singing and
Also,
dancing.
Lauryn Hill. We were just talking with a previous guest about, 90s black cinema, and she was like, it was the best decade. And then she was like, well, maybe it was the 70s. And then she paused and said, well, the 70s film was built on blaxploitation. Talk to me a little bit about the emergence of blaxploitation film in the 70s and the progression through the 90s.
Well, I think there are some parallels between the blaxploitation films of the 70s, the Shafts and the Superflies and the Foxy Browns, with films like Menace to Society and Straight Outta Brooklyn, films that are very macho, very about masculinity, feature violence and sex and so on. But I think there's another parallel, which is in the 70s at the same time as blaxploitation is happening, which is beyond a couple of black directors like Gordon Parks and Melvin Van Peebles, is often kind of directed and funded by white people. But there's at the same time as blaxploitation, you have just a few miles west, the UCLA, the LA Rebellion, filmmakers like Charles Burnett and Julie Dash and Haile Garima and Billy Woodbury, who are making these incredible interior poetic films about black life. And they're still making work in the 90s. So there's like a dual parallel, which I think is really interesting. But blaxploitation, it's a pejorative term in some respects, but it's also fun. People enjoy going to see these things because they turn certain stereotypes of black people on their heads, while perhaps at the same time reifying or reinscribing other stereotypes. They're worthy of real critical analysis, I think. But the bottom line is a lot of them are quite fun.
So many cinephiles in their 20s and younger, they might be turning out for Jordan Peele's latest film. They might be lining up on opening day of Black Panther, but maybe they haven't seen a lot of these films that you curated. What do you hope that younger audiences who aren't familiar with these movies take away?
That there's always been a lineage of black film, and that black filmmakers, often in the margins, have been working to flip and reverse stereotypes, deepen and bring complexity to stories of black people and black lives, and that this is not just a new thing. I think often in the culture there's a rush to be the first of this, the first of that, when in fact there is a history there, and it's part of my job as a curator to explore and present that history, but not to do it in a heavy-handed or pedantic way. I think I can talk about it in terms of theory and criticism, but it's really about fun. And I want younger people who've not seen these films to feel like they've had a real experience and that it sparks them to go and learn more. So it's down to us to make the theatrical experience really worthwhile and hopefully fun. And I hope that's what we're doing with this series.
I won't ask you which of these films is your favorite because that seems unfair, but which one do you think will be the most fun to watch in a theater?
I would say, I think Belly, just because it's so weird.
Wow, you love Belly.
I think it's great. I mean, I think it's an underrated film It's sold loads of tickets already, so be quick.
Okay, you've sold me on it.
Yeah, it's pure cinema.
But speaking of tickets, tell people how they can get tickets. I know there's like a special package deal if they want to see more than 2 films.
Yeah, you can buy bam.org/film. Or just the BAM website. You can come in and buy tickets at the box office.
Just like normal.
Just like normal. There is a multi-film discount. If you buy more than 2 or 3, you get some money off. So yeah, we're trying to make it worth your while. And yeah, just come through. I would recommend absolutely everything.
Great. Thank you so much for coming out and talking to us.
Thank you. Cheers.